Classical Conversations presents Refining Rhetoric with CEO Robert Bortons, a podcast where faith, business, politics, and classical education meet. Join us as we use the classical tools of rhetoric to seek truth in every arena of life.
Hello and welcome back to another exciting episode of Refining Rhetoric. Today my guest is Alex Newman. You have probably seen him before, whether it's on Fox News or just one of the media hits he's doing. He is the CEO of Liberty Sentinel Media, Executive Director of Public School Exit, award-winning international journalist, nationally syndicated radio program host, educator, author, speaker, investor, consultant, father, classical conversations dad. We've got a brand new book that we've endorsed that we're wanting you to go purchase. So we'll let you know all about it, why you should go get it. It's called Indoctrinating Our Children to Death, Government Schools, War on Faith, Family, and Freedom, and How to Stop It. So without further ado, Alex, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Robert, and thank you for that kind introduction.
Yeah, so Alex, tell us about this war on our families that the government schools are waging. And of course, many of our listeners are homeschooling, but some people decide not to homeschool forever. So they might want an insight on what's going on so they can keep their kids out and maybe help rescue some other kids.
Yeah, well, thank you, Robert. And so what I document in the book, mostly with primary source documents, by the way, the writings of the very people I'm exposing, is a deliberate effort going back to the early 1800s to turn children away from God, away from the Bible, away from the biblical principles that underpin not just the United States of America, but Western society, Western civilization more broadly. And also even just basic biblical precepts that happen to work really well, like private property and family and things like this. And you see this reflected so clearly in the writings, in the essays, in the books, in the publications of the people who designed the system that we today call the public education system. So whether we're looking at Robert Owen, the first guy to seriously propose that the government ought to be involved in educating our children, all the way through, John Dewey, who's kind of widely perceived, at least, as the founding father of the public school system in America and by extension the world, all the way up to the present day. You look at the people running the National Education Association. You look at the people running the U.S. Department of Education. Their agenda is very, very clear. And I think there's an incredible level of naivete, first of all, among the parents that are deliberately sending their children to public school and subjecting them to this, but even among homeschool families. I think a lot of homeschool families think, well, that doesn't even really concern us because we don't participate in that, so it doesn't really make a difference. Well, it does make a big difference. Something like 80% of the young people today are in these schools, if you will. And that's going to have a profound impact on all of our lives, whether that be through our colleagues at work, our elected officials, the bureaucrats running the bureaucracies. So this is an issue that concerns everybody. And I truly believe, Robert, that it is the most important issue facing our families, the church, and even our country.
I mean, you can go on the UN, you can go on all these like big globalist websites, and they say what they're trying to do. But why do Christians, why do the church, why do conservatives in general not believe them? Or you said we're naive, but I mean, it's out there. You're doing this hard work of exposing it. So why is it not getting through our thick skulls?
Yeah, it's a good question, Robert. You're absolutely right that it's out there. I mean, one of the things that I looked at was the UN's agreements on education, going clear back to the founding of UNESCO. But even in more recent decades, I mean, just in the last 30 years or so, there have been multiple UN agreements signed onto by basically every national government on the planet that openly say they're going to internationalize, they're going to globalize education, that all children everywhere, by the way, they don't make any exception for homeschool students, needs to learn from the same standards, right? I mean, this is right in the text of international agreements that your government is signing on to. The reason why people don't believe it, I think there's several reasons. The first is it's not something that the fake media is talking about. They're keeping us distracted with Kardashians and the latest celebrity scandal or
Right.
what happened at the Oscars or the Grammys or the Super Bowl or whatever. And so there's no real focus on the actual things that matter, right? They would much rather that we debate about whether Kardashian's new outfit was cool or not cool than important things like what's going to happen to the future of our civilization if 80% of our children are dumbed down using international standards that are basically aligned with the crazy ideas of theosophists and people who are communicating with spiritual entities, or at least claim to be. You would think that would be front page news. You would think that would be headline news on all the networks, but it's not. And so I think the reason why your average American hasn't figured this out is just because it's not an issue that's talked about. Now, there was just a poll that was released, Robert. Something like 60% of Americans consider the media to be the enemy. And they're not wrong, right? They understand. Americans understand instinctively that we're being lied to, that we're being manipulated. But they don't, I think, understand fully the subtlety, right? They think that we're just getting a spin on the important news. What they don't realize is they're not even talking about the important news. And so that's why your average American hasn't figured it out. And I think for homeschoolers, there is a real sense, and I say this as a homeschool dad. I love the homeschool community, but there's a real sense that we're insulated from all that and it doesn't concern us. And so we don't even have to take the time to look into it. We can just concern ourselves with the newest homeschool materials. We can concern ourselves with the newest book from or the newest podcast from a homeschooler that we like, instead of looking at, well, what's happening broadly in the culture and how is that ultimately going to impact all of us and what should we be doing about it? So I think really ignorance is the key word here. But I have to say, ignorance is not necessarily excusable, because I think there needs to be an understanding of the fact that this is really important. And so when something is important, that imposes on us an obligation to not just learn about it, but then to take steps to protect ourselves, our families, our communities, our churches, and of course, our nation as well.
Yeah. So, what are some of the solutions to these big issues that we're seeing? Because it's oftentimes like, well, I'm just a homeschool family. I'm still trying to get Johnny to read, and he's 9 years old, and all of my other homeschool friends, they're all reading that they're 4 years old, or whatever crazy comparison that we're doing. Because it's really easy to feel like overwhelmed because they're our kids and we're pouring our heart into them, and there's not like some outside expert telling us that we're doing a good job. So how can we as individuals engage in this really war that's on our country in a way that benefits our children and our grandchildren, and that we can feel like we're involved and not just spinning our wheels constantly.
That's a great question, Robert. And I think homeschoolers are, for the most part, doing the main thing right. I always tell people your first and most important responsibility, other than your responsibility and duties to God, is to your family. Your children, your family, your household, that's your first ministry. And if you screw that up by not following God's instructions, all the other stuff that you're doing is rather pointless, right? You're not going to, I hear a lot of people say, well, the Great Commission, we got to focus on making disciples of all nations. Meanwhile, their children are being indoctrinated to hate God, hate their family. Like, well, you're losing your children. You're not doing the discipleship that you're supposed to be doing with your children. Don't tell me about how you're going to do discipleship with Haitians or people in Thailand, right? It's just not going to happen if you fall down on your first and most important mission. But with that said, it doesn't just stop with our children. It doesn't just stop with our families. We, I think, very much need to be involved in our communities. We very much need to be involved even at the national level. Now, that looks different for everybody, right? If we're talking about families, whether we're talking about the church, broadly speaking, right? The Bible describes the church as a body with many members, and everybody's got a different function. So my function as a journalist is to dig out this information and bring it to the American people. Other people will have different functions. If you're a Christian who's in elected office, well, you have an obligation to take this important factual information and apply it to the sphere of responsibility that God has placed you in, whether that be your state legislature or even Congress or governorship, whatever the case may be. But I think it really begins, Robert, with a proper diagnosis. When we're looking at solutions, the reason we've been so ineffective, everybody's got a kind of sense that something's wrong. But the reason we've been so ineffective at dealing with what's wrong is that we have come up with improper diagnoses. It's very much like in medicine.
Right.
If a doctor looks at a patient and says, hey, you have a broken arm, but really they have cancer, well, putting the arm in a brace or amputating the arm is not actually going to fix the cancer. It might even make the problem worse. So we've got to have an accurate diagnosis. And that's really why I wrote Indoctrinating Our Children to Death. It begins with an understanding that the system is not broken. It's doing what it was designed to do. It's based on bad principles. Nowhere in the scriptures do we find government responsible for educating or discipling children. It is very, very clearly a responsibility of parents and the family. So we've got to start with correct information. We've got to start with correct principles, and then the other stuff will become clear all on its own, I believe. So the problem here, the diagnosis that we need to recognize is that we've got an institution that should not exist, that is corrupting the hearts, minds, and even the souls of our children. And so if the institution is wrong to begin with, if it's built on faulty principles, the solution isn't to tinker around the edges or maybe have the legislature pass a new law for them to ignore or have the school board pass a new policy for them to ignore. The solution is to look at this at a systemic level and say, what's wrong with the system? Well, the system itself ought not exist. I compare it sometimes to collective agriculture in the Soviet Union. Right? You could try to reform collective agriculture in the Soviet Union all day long. Well, we should have more working hours. We should have less working hours. We should have different tools to work the soil. We should plant different seeds. I mean, all of these things might improve yields a little bit, but still the whole system is flawed because it's based on a flawed model. It's based on socialism. It's based on collectivism. And so you're never going to have a truly productive agricultural system, and all the tinkering in the world's not going to make any difference. It's still a flawed system. The same is true with the system that today is educating the overwhelming majority of American children. So we need to look at more systemic solutions, very much including abolishing the whole system and allowing a non-system to emerge in its place where parents take their role as the primary ones responsible for the education of children, and then supplementally the church, voluntary organizations, nonprofit institutions, companies can come alongside and provide support where needed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think first principles is where we got to start. And when I tell people, what you said, and you said it much more eloquently than I do, but really the issues with public school, they can't be reformed because it's based on the redistribution of wealth. And the fundamental issue with it is it's paid for through taxes and run by the government or monitored by the government. And that's fundamentally not how God designed education to work. So it's fundamentally never going to work. And there's no chance of reforming it. But people still say we need to send our Christian kids to the public school so they can be a light and a witness. Is that something that moves your heartstrings and gets you to reconsider your position?
No, I hear that a lot. I hear it from certain pastors. Oftentimes their wife is working in the public school or something, right? So they have a little bit of a conflict of interest there. I sometimes hear that from parents who know they have a responsibility to do the right thing, but they really like the BMW. They really like the big house. They don't want to give up that second income. They don't want to reduce their standard of living a little bit. But really, I think there's some very simple ways to look at this. The Bible teaches that the world right now is engaged in a gigantic spiritual war. The forces of evil are running rampant. They are, the devil, as the Bible says, is walking around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. And by the way, your children look very appetizing, right? And so the job of parents then, and to a lesser degree pastors, is to come in and try to protect those children, to protect the flock from the forces of evil. You do not send your child into the enemy camp to be trained when you know there's a spiritual war raging all around you. And I understand, you'll always say, well, there are good Christian teachers in the school. Yes, I'm sure there are. In fact, I know some, right? There are good Christian administrators in the school. Yeah, I'm sure there are. I know some of them, right? But that doesn't change the fact that the system is rotten. You might say, well, there were good Christians in the Roman army. Yes, there were, right? We have recorded examples of Roman soldiers coming to Christ, coming to know the Lord. And yet that doesn't mean that we want the Roman army to educate our children, right? And so the same thing is true with this. Just like you wouldn't send your child to Afghanistan with an M16 when they're 12 years old, well, you wouldn't send your child into a raging spiritual war before they're mature in their faith, before they can properly defend their faith, before they understand apologetics, before they understand the manipulation that the system will use to try to pry them from their parents, pry them from their faith. So, I understand the tendency to want to do that. It's so much easier to just send our children to the free government babysitter and pretend like we're doing it for the glory of God. But deep down inside, I think everybody who makes that argument knows that it falls flat. Once your child is firmly grounded in the faith, very well trained, then you send them out like arrows into the culture to do the things that God has called us to do. But in the meantime, during the preparation phase, during the discipleship phase, parents have an obligation to take that responsibility on themselves, or to delegate it at least to somebody who they know can be trusted, to somebody who they know believes in the truths of the Word of God, to somebody who shares their worldview, not to somebody or to a system that is going to wage war on everything that they believe, and that is ultimately going to turn their children into brainwashed, dumbed down enemies of God and their own families. And of course, the United States of America. We cannot do that. So folks, don't look for excuses on why you should keep doing it. Ask yourself honestly, is this what's right in God's eyes? Is this what's right for my children? And if the answer to either of those questions is no, don't come up with excuses. Just do what you need to do.
Hey everyone, the Copper Lodge Library series has a new book out, The Secret Garden. It is a beloved classic novel. It has footnotes that will really help you understand what's going on in the novel, understand word definitions, really brings the reading to another level for you and your students. Christian themes in The Secret Garden include redemption, love, the importance of community, and the foreword reminds us to approach life with wisdom. It is a wonderful read aloud for your younger students and a piece of the curriculum that you will encounter with your challenged students as well. So go to copperlodgelibrary.com or theclassicalconversationsbooks.com to get your copy today. Again, that's copperlodgelibrary.com to see the complete collection. Now let's get back to the show. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you might find yourself in a position today that you don't want to be in, but what's your plan to get out? Like, okay, you've made the previous decisions in your life that maybe you're where you shouldn't be, but get yourself a roadmap and get out. Absolutely. So sometimes you hear these ideas that, oh, it's not my schools, or that's in California, or that's in Illinois. But recently in the state of Oklahoma, there's been schools that have had their children sucking on their teachers' toes to fundraise. So can we really believe that it's not in our school because we have a conservative school district?
Frankly, Robert, it is absolute foolishness. And it's just exactly like for the last issue we just discussed. This is an attempt by parents to rationalize and justify the poor decision that they have made. It's not made out of genuine conviction that their school district is somehow different. The reality is, and we prove this conclusively in the book, the reality is we now have a national school system that is increasingly a global education system. And even the most conservative district in the most conservative state is still going to be peddling this wicked worldview, is still going to be peddling the weird sex stuff. Florida is a really good example. I know multiple people who have moved down to Florida because they were falsely told that Florida had good government schools. Hey, they passed the Stop Woke Act, right? They're not allowed to talk to my second grader about LGBT stuff. Well, they just surrendered, right? They just came to an agreement with Equality Florida, this radical LGBT hate group. That basically nullified the spirit of the law, right? So they're still going to be able to talk about weird sex stuff with your kids. They're still going to be able to do all this stuff. And by the way, who thought that it was okay to teach fifth graders about these things in a government school. Why would the law cut it off at fourth grade? Why would we think it's okay to teach fifth graders that they might have been born in the wrong body and that castration or a hysterectomy is a reasonable solution? Folks, this is rot that has infected the entire country. I sometimes use the example of Utah. Utah is, on paper at least, one of the most conservative states in the United States. Super majority of Republicans in both houses of the legislature. Every county except one is under Republican control, fully under Republican control. Every statewide elected official is a Republican. The voting base is about as Republican, about as conservative as they come. And still, the weird sex stuff is going on. And you'd think that's just the most basic, right? Don't teach my kids that they might have been born in the wrong body. We're not even talking about the worldview, the dumbed down curriculum, the quackery that passes for reading instruction. We're just talking about the most basic of things. Don't teach my child that chopping off his private parts is going to make him feel better, right? Basic stuff. Well, I was in Utah in 2020, right as everything was shutting down from the COVID absurdity. And I met with some of the state school board members there, and they had data with them. They gave me these papers that came out of the medical prescription substance database, right? It's the database where all the prescriptions go into, so people know kind of who's getting prescribed what and everything. Well, turns out in a 5-year period from 2015 to 2020, there had been a 10,000% increase in the number of minor girls. These are underage girls who were going through these gender transitions. They were being prescribed testosterone injections. They were being prescribed, whatever so-called treatments, puberty blockers, etc., on the road to ultimately hysterectomies and double mastectomies. If the most conservative state, or one of the most conservative states in the country, has a 10,000% increase in the number of little girls going through this, I can tell you it's not something that they're putting in the water. It's not something that the parents are doing. It's coming ultimately from the government school system. So there is no school district in this country that is safe. There is no state in this country where the government schools are safe. And frankly, that is increasingly the case at the international level. They're bragging about the fact that they're standardizing education based on UN standards all over the planet. And so, folks, it doesn't matter if you live in the most Republican conservative district of Oklahoma, the rot, the filth, the dumbing down, the wicked worldview is still at the core of what the system is teaching.
Yeah, no, I saw an article that says Germany's starting to introduce, I guess, basically sex type rooms for children as young as kindergarten or first grade over there. And hey, guess what? You're not allowed to homeschool in Germany. It's illegal. But they actually have, at least when I looked a few years ago, they had full school choice. So you could go to any private school that you wanted to, and the government would pay for it, or you could go for the German government school system. So we see all these issues, and all of our best think tanks have come up with this idea of school choice, let the money follow the child. It's still based on collectivism. When we see and talk to legislators, they are, if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But to me, you've got the disease, the virus is collectivism. It is the redistribution of wealth. It is the dollars. And so you've got, it feels good giving the money away if you're a elected official. It feels good taking the money if you're the benefactor of the federal or state dollars because you didn't actually have to work for it. But I believe that this just takes the disease of public education and brings it into quote unquote private schools that will be funded by this. So, is school choice, or I know you don't believe that school choice in the term that the current Republicans are using it is the answer. So why is it not the answer? And what are some things that we should be advocating for as if we are a conservative Christian?
Yeah, it's a very good point, Robert. And not only do I believe that so-called school choice is not the answer, I believe it's the anti-answer. It's like the worst possible thing we could do. We're taking the people who have already made the correct decision to flee the system, to protect their children from this wicked system that's free, so-called, and we're sucking them back into it, right? And so to go back to what we were discussing earlier, first principles, we need to get away from the idea that it is the government's responsibility to educate children. It's not. It never should have been. It never was. It never will be the correct or proper role of government to educate anybody's children. What we're really talking about here is taking something from your neighbor through force and using it for yourself. And so on principle alone, this is a really bad idea. You shouldn't take stuff from your neighbor. You shouldn't covet. Here in Florida, I could get $40,000 a year, soon almost $50,000 a year. We got another child on the way, stolen from my neighbors to quote unquote educate them. All I would have to do in exchange is give up my principles, give up my morals, and also give up my freedom. Right? So then I have to meet with a choice navigator who's going to assess the educational needs of my child for me. Frankly, I don't think a government bureaucrat or somebody paid by the government needs to assess the educational needs of my child. I am quite capable of doing that. My wife is quite capable of doing that. Thank you very much. Nobody knows our children better. Nobody loves our children more than my wife and I. We don't need some weird bureaucrat who's never met us before to assess anything about our children. Thank you very much. Second of all, you got to subject them to the state tests. Third of all, and of course, once you start subjecting them to the state test, well, you don't want your kids to look dumb. So you got to teach them what you expect is going to be on the state test. So now suddenly you're doing the same thing the government schools are doing in your alleged homeschool, right? Third of all, you've got to give all your data to the government. And frankly, there's no reason why the government needs any data on my children. You can have their name, right? If we feel generous today, there's no reason that you need to know what my child thinks, what my child knows, what my child is doing at the doctor's office. That's not your business, right? That is simply not their business. So I had a front row seat to this, Robert. We lived in Sweden when the school choice trap closed. And I can tell you, the free money, so-called, it's like the cheese in the mousetrap. It looks delicious. It smells delicious. It's oh so tempting. But as soon as you get over there to start chewing on it, the trap is going to close and it's going to smash your skull in. Forgive the graphic imagery, but that's exactly what happened in Sweden. They told people, oh, school choice, all the same talking points that we see here in America. The money will follow the child. It's going to introduce competition and market forces into the system. And that sounded so great that every private school in Sweden, except the one where the aristocrats send their children, said, ooh, free cheese. And they went and got the cheese. And we were there when the trap closed. And it was a horror show. All of the private schools, in name only now, that had gotten dependent on the government money were ordered to teach the government curriculum, which, by the way, included weird sex stuff in first grade, gender stuff in first grade, no more Bible, no more prayer, right? That stuff officially was banned. You can't have public money financing Bible study at school, right? What would that then the state would be supporting religion. We don't want that, even though they had a state church until about 20 years ago. So right away, all the private schools became government schools. All the private schools started teaching the insane, perverted government curriculum. And for good measure, they eliminated the final bastion of choice by banning homeschooling. And they didn't just ban homeschooling. They started kicking in doors and kidnapping homeschooled children. They started boarding airplanes as frantic families were trying to flee this dystopian school choice regime to other countries. They started sending armed cops onto airplanes to grab these children as the families were desperately attempting to flee. So no, folks, school choice is really anti-school choice. We have school choice now. You can send your child to a government brainwash camp. You can pull them out and homeschool them. You can send them to the private school of your choice. You can send them to an Islamic madrasa. You can send them to a Jewish yeshiva. You can send them to a Lutheran school. You can send them to a Catholic parochial school. You can do whatever you want with them in the United States of America. We have school choice now. But this idea that the government funding our private schools or our homeschools is going to fix things is not supported by reason. It's not supported by the evidence. In fact, everywhere that government money has flowed, government control has followed. So it's a really bad idea. I will add this one caveat, though. I'm glad that Republicans and conservatives are trying to think of ways to get the children out of the system. That's a positive development. That's the discussion we should be having. What's the best and fastest way to get the children out? But there are several options there. And the worst of all the options is, hey, let's suck them all back into the system by giving them government money. We need to avoid that like the plague. Folks, do not get your homeschool or your private school intertwined with government. You will regret it probably sooner than you'd like to imagine.
Yeah, I noticed here in North Carolina, they passed some school choice bills that homeschoolers, thankfully, we fought and we're not included in that. Many states are either not including homeschoolers or creating a separate ID kind of so you can sign up. But there's the schools that are private that aren't taking it are all the elite schools. Like they're saying, no, we do not want your money. Like obviously homeschoolers are fighting back against it, but it's kind of we've got a church up the way that's getting $3 million of state money to educate kids in their church schools or whatever. And it's like, man, I kind of want to make a cartoon with that church's logo on it and a boot on all their neighbors' throats. Like, I don't think collectivism isn't going to be honored by God, and the fact that we've got Christians that are, actively encouraging to steal from your neighbor. One of those pesky 10 Commandments, and it's just sad to see. So we got to keep educating people. So, Alex, where can we get your latest book, Indoctrinating Our Children to Death, Government Schools, War on Faith, Family, and Freedom, and How to Stop It? What's the best place to get it, and what's the best place to keep up with all the great things that you're doing?
Well, thank you very much, Robert. So easiest place to get it is probably Amazon. As much as I dislike Amazon, it's cheaper than I can sell it. Free shipping if you've got Prime, and it'll get to you the next day. I cannot beat that. For those who don't mind waiting a little longer and paying for shipping, you can get it from my website. It's libertysentinel.org. I'll send you a signed copy, but it'll take me probably 2 weeks or so. Plus it costs shipping. You can also get it at a lot of bookstores, and there are a lot of resellers that are selling it now. It's called Indoctrinating Our Children to Death. You were kind enough to write an endorsement for us, Robert. We appreciate that very much. It's been endorsed by a lot of great Americans, including Kirk Cameron, General Flynn, Pete Hegseth, the co-host of Fox and Friends, Dr. James Lindsay. We've got Dr. Carol Swain, the co-chair of the White House 1776 Commission. The Honorable Diane Douglas, former superintendent of public schools for the state of Arizona, wrote the foreword for us. So we're really pleased with the number of people coming alongside and helping us get this out there. And I want to say one more thing about the school of choice. I know we're almost out of time, but UNESCO, the UN Education Agency, we talked a little bit about this. I've got a document from them published a few years ago where they're telling governments you should give money to what they call non-state education providers. And the reason why they call for that is that they want the government then, and they say this in the document, to be able to impose equity goals, to be able to impose testing, to be able to impose non-discrimination in hiring. So when that weird guy in a dress comes and wants to teach the kindergarten children in your Christian kindergarten, you have no option but to hire him or her or they or Zier or whatever it is. So folks, this is a recipe for disaster. And I write about these things very frequently on my personal website, libertysentinel.org. I'm senior editor at the New American Magazine, executive director of Public School Exit. So you can find me at any of those places. And we do a free newsletter, libertysentinel.org/subscribe. And then I'm on X or Twitter, whatever, Alex Newman _JOU. The JOU is for journalism. And thanks again for having me, Robert. It's an honor and a pleasure. Appreciate all that you guys do, both through this wonderful podcast and also through Classical Conversations, which I am convinced is the best education resource out there, probably in the world. I don't know of anybody that does a better job than you guys. So thank you very much for all that you do for the cause of Christ and for our families and for our children. Really, really appreciate it.
Well, Alex, that's high praise. And just thank you for all you're doing to expose UNESCO and the globalists and how they want to take over our kids. And hopefully today's episode can wake some people up. If it woke you up, be sure to share it with a friend. And Alex, I'm sure we'll see each other soon.
Thank you, sir. God bless you.
Hey, everyone. I hope you enjoyed today's episode with Alex Newman. He is such an interesting researcher. He goes and does the hard work so that we can have accurate information. So go check out his website. And just let you know, we are now on YouTube Music and Amazon Music. So if you're ever looking for us and can't find us on your favorite platform, just keep searching because we're there. And be sure to check out all of our episodes on YouTube so you can see our conversation and just really experience it fully. So until next time, share this episode with a friend and keep educating yourself. And thank you so much. God bless.
Thank you for listening to Refining Rhetoric with Robert Bortons. Want more? Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss an episode. You can also follow us on social media to continue the conversation and visit classicalconversations.com/rhetoric to find out how you can join a local homeschool community.